Are we breaking up? Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my Masculine Feminine Energies film breakdown series with the breakup. If you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I have a ton of videos on this content, but a brief summary: masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies, but we all have a core energy that's the one we're most ourselves in. That energy often links up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it very often does. We can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies, and each of these energies contains archetypes. We all contain all of the archetypes within us, so we can tap into whenever we need to. I have a lot of videos about the masculine and the feminine archetypes if you'd like to learn more. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine, one partner to be in the feminine. These opposite energies attract sexually and same energies repel sexually. So let's get into the breakup. This movie is from 2006. It was not requested, and I actually had never seen this movie before, so this is my reaction to watching it for the first time. To be honest, the reason why I wanted to watch this movie and do a breakdown of it was because clips from this movie were showing up in my social media feeds like crazy, and I wasn't 100% sure why, probably because I do a lot of film breakdowns, but I've been seeing people make commentary about some of the scenes from this movie, and I really wanted to watch the whole film to get a context. Some of the scenes in this movie, just seeing them on social media, just like hit me. Like I had this extreme reaction to it, so I was like, I really wanted to see the whole movie in context to really see how I felt about the individual scenes. So this movie follows the relationship of Brooke and Gary, played by Jennifer Aniston and Vince Vaughn. I know those two dated. I'm not sure if they were dating when they made this movie or not. I don't really remember. I used to follow more celebrity gossip at the time, but I don't really remember. I think that Vince Vaughn was actually one of the writers or creators or something of this movie. As much as I've seen clips of this movie with people breaking down what Brooke did wrong in these situations, and she even admits in the movie she was not innocent in the whole situation, and I'm gonna get into some tips onto how you cannot end up being Brooke. But this movie really was a breakup movie almost from the perspective of a man. Now at the end of the day, you did get some of Brooke and some of Gary, but I do think that this movie was really more of a coming of age story for Gary, so to speak, and I liked that about it. I also, like, side note, as far as the movie goes, it was tough for me to watch because so much of it felt so real to me. I think they did an amazing job of making this situation of this couple who was living together and breaking up and then like had to live together and continue to live together while they were going through this painful breakup. It made it feel very real, which was wonderful. Like the acting, the writing, everything about this movie I think was wonderful. It hit hard for me. I'm just gonna say, my ex-husband was a big Vince Vaughn fan, and after watching this movie I'm like, oh, I know why. So you kind of get in the very beginning of the movie how Brooke and Gary met. Gary kind of saw Brooke at a baseball game and just like really pursued her. Just very much like him being his masculine of being the one who pursues. I would say though that in their initial interaction, she was I think more closed off to him, and he was kind of more like open, talkative, playful. So as much as he was doing the pursuing, he wasn't fully like grounded in his masculine energy. And she seemed to be a little bit more grounded in her sort of masculine energy and a little bit more closed off and more directional, whereas he was a little bit more all over the place. I think what that does is it really sets the tone for their relationship. He is obviously a very masculine cored being, but he's not grounded in his masculine. He's in his feminine. He's very childlike, I would say, in his just everything. Everything in his life is very childlike. Like, he has not grown up, he has not stepped into his like adult masculine energy, but he has more of a masculine mindset. So many men today are in that headspace. Like, Vince Vaughn really, to me, is the epitome of, I would say, like Gen X men for sure, even like older millennial men, maybe even younger millennial men, I don't know. I don't really know that much about the younger people, but like, he really does represent a huge part of the male population today. They're masculine at their core, so that their mindset, their way of looking at the world, their way of thinking is very masculine, but they have not stepped into that grounded, disciplined, like adult grown-up masculine energy. So they're still in this like man-child mode, which generally speaking, like, children tend to have more feminine energy. They tend to flow more, they tend to be all over the place, they tend to be easily distracted, and because the world is sort of new to them. So children tend to, male and female children, tend to have a very sort of feminine energy about them. And most cultures in history have believed that men need masculine leaders to initiate them into their masculine energy. Many men today don't have that, and it appears like Gary is one of those people. Ironically, he has an older brother who is Mr. Responsible. We don't ever meet Gary's father, so we don't really know the situation with the father. We know he has two brothers, an older brother who does seem to be much more masculine, disciplined, and a younger brother played by Rip Wheeler from Yellowstone in a very not Rip Wheeler. I literally was like, where do I know this guy from? And then I was like, oh my god, that's Rip. And he is the opposite of like, he is just like a reckless child, kind of pervy, like just, yeah, like the anti-Rip Wheeler. It's really crazy that, I don't know, it's just weird to see. Like, it's worth watching the movie just for that. So Gary really has not become the adult, right? He has not stepped into the role of being a grown adult like his older brother has. He's not quite as like irresponsible as his younger brother, but he's kind of wavering in the middle. Brooke is interesting in that she's not necessarily a super masculine character. Brooke is very feminine at her core, but she does seem to be somebody who has resigned herself to living in a more masculine world in a more masculine way. She works in an art gallery, and you can tell she's very into art design. It's interesting how even when she's working with a client in the art gallery and she's, you know, he doesn't know anything about art, he's like in his head, he doesn't know like what he should choose, and she really does step into that feminine of like, look at a piece of art and like if you feel like you need to have it, like that's her thing. Like she's dropped into that feeling, like even in this more masculine world of, you know, working in a company that is selling art, like masculine mindset of like she's the salesperson that's going to sell art, but she does it from a very feminine place of really helping her customers to sink in and like feel what it is that they resonate with. She has a nurturing quality to her when she's selling, when she's dealing with her customers. As much as she is a very career-oriented woman, and she does have a lot of like needing the structure, needing the kind of to control things a little bit, she also is really good at tapping into that, the feeling, the connection, the intuition. You see later on she does a lot of sketching on her own. Brooke really is a very feminine character at her core. I think she's sort of the stereotypical woman who like really is connected to her feminine and wants to be in her feminine, but feels this pull to need to be the career woman as well. Not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but what happens is that masculine that she feels like she needs to have attracts in the man-child, and she then becomes a mother to him. That's a big theme. This relationship overall is the very typical mothering woman, man-child man. They move in together, they buy a condo together, and they end up having this huge argument early on in the movie. They're getting ready for a dinner party for basically their families to come over. I'm gonna break down some aspects to this, but one thing that I wish they had made clear in the movie is whether or not this argument that they have has been something that they have argued about in the past, or if this was the first time that the two of them were getting this all out and getting it all off their chests. They don't make that clear in the movie. A part of me believes that probably they've had this argument before, and that this is why Brooke is like, okay, I'm done, I can't do this anymore, because she's like, I can't go through this again. A part of me also thinks that the way that they're talking, it could very well be that they've both been holding this stuff in for so long, and this is the first time that this is actually like come out in words in a big explosion. I just wish they'd made that more clear, because I do feel like in this particular scenario, it could go either way. So it kind of starts where Gary, his career is essentially him and his brothers run a business where they're giving people tours of Chicago. This takes place in Chicago. His older brother is like the business guy. He's the one that does all the, you know, paperwork and all that kind of stuff. He's obviously like the grounded masculine structure. His younger brother is just the mechanic who fixes all the stuff. They don't really say that, but it's kind of implied. Gary is, he's the performer. He's the one that gives the guided tours. He's like the celebrity of the company. So he's doing something that he loves to do. Now, I'm not saying that it's not exhausting, but he's getting to go to work. He's getting to be the star. He's getting to be the center of attention. Like, this is something he thrives on. Not saying that he wouldn't be tired, but he does this and then he wants to come home and he wants to zone out and play video games. Now, for a masculine-minded person, that's not totally out of the realm of possibilities. Most masculine men, if they have been in like a state of focus, of discipline all day, generally speaking, at the end of a long, hard day, I'll say, the masculine is going to want some like silence. That's very common for somebody with a masculine core. The feminine, generally speaking, after sort of a long, hard day, generally wants love and connection. She wants to actually like be with her partner, feel her partner. That's usually where couples for the most part have a conflict, because like if you get two couples that have both had a long hard day for whatever reason, whatever they've been doing, whether they've both been working or he's been working outside the home and she's been working inside the home, like whatever their scenario is, typically at the end of the day, the masculine partner will want to say, I need to be left alone for a while. The feminine partner will be like, okay, but I want to feel connected with you. That's usually a conflict. What happens is Gary gets home, he wants to zone out and play video games. Brooke has worked all day and is now getting ready for a dinner party, and she's been slaving in the kitchen trying to make this dinner party perfect. She asks Gary to bring her 12 lemons and he brings her 3, and she flips out because she had this vision of making a 12 lemon centerpiece to fill this bowl with lemons as a centerpiece, and Gary's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? Like, they're just show lemons, as he put it. Again, a masculine-minded person is going to see function. A feminine-minded person is going to care about the aesthetics. Brooke is a very aesthetically minded person. She's very into the visual, the flavors, the sensations, the art of things. Whereas Gary is, because he's a more masculine-minded person, he's not acting as masculine, but that's where his mind works. He is thinking it's all about function. Well, if they're not functional lemons, why don't you just use them in the chicken and, you know, use them as something functional as opposed to using them as just for something for show? Because he doesn't value the something that's for show as much as he does the thing that is functional. That's where his masculine mind comes in and where her feminine mind comes in. However, the masculine is a giving energy. The masculine gives. Literally, male-female dynamics, what happens? The masculine gives, the feminine opens and receives. That's the basis of, that's how you make a baby. That's how you, sexual interactions. The masculine gives, he penetrates. The feminine opens and receives. So the fact that she has asked him to do something and entrusted him with doing something for her, and he has not provided the thing that she needed and that she asked for, she now feels very let down. Some people might be like, it's just lemons. It doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter that it's just lemons. He has said he would do something for her. He would provide something for her that she needed in that moment, whether it was an actual like life or death need or a need that she needed for her vision, and he didn't provide that for her. So she's now feeling hurt because he hasn't fulfilled that masculine role of doing something for her that he said he was going to do. Whether it was lemons, whether it was anything, doesn't matter. It's still a letdown in that moment. And he doesn't seem to think it's a problem, even though he hasn't actually fulfilled the promise that he made of providing something for her that she needed to complete her vision. So then she's asking him to shower so he can be ready, so he can greet the guests, so she can finish cooking in the kitchen, because she's been doing all this work in the kitchen and she didn't want to be running back and forth greeting guests and doing everything herself. She was asking him to do things for her to make her life easier, and he kept saying that, oh, he'd do it later, it didn't matter. She obviously needed him to step up and do these things in order for her to feel like he had her back in that situation. He was brushing it off because he just wanted to play the video games and he wanted to zone out, because as far as he was concerned, he'd had a long day. Of course, guests start arriving and he's like, okay, now I'm gonna jump in the shower, and she, not gonna lie, I took that so personal. My ex-husband would take showers at the most inconvenient times. And I would literally like plan out, like he was a child, like when he needed to take a shower so that the rest of our like evening or whatever could work the way it needed to, and he would just like ignore me and then take a shower at the most inconvenient time. Drove me insane. So like when that was happening, like I was like feeling Brooke so hard, right? I was like, oh my god. Anyway, they have the dinner party and everything. So they have the dinner party, and then after the dinner party, it's interesting how Brooke's mom, played by the iconic Anne Margaret, offers to help clean up, and she's like, no problem, we got it. So then she asks Gary to help with the dishes, and he's like, I just need to zone out, I'll do it later, and she's like, no, look, if we do it together, we'll get it done, you know, it'll be done really quick. And he was just like, he's like, well, no, we'll do it later, it doesn't matter. And she's like, no, well, it matters to me. She wants the help with the dishes because she feels like she's been doing it all. The masculine is doing, the feminine is receiving. I'm not saying that as a woman, if you are the feminine, that you can never do anything. However, the masculine is the one who does and the feminine is the one who receives. So the fact that she's now in this position of doing everything, she's literally done everything, she's looking for him to step up and do something for her. So then she gets really upset, she gets really angry because he doesn't want to do the dishes. So he gets up and says, I'll do the dishes. He's like, fine, I'll do the dishes. And she's like, you know what, I don't want you to do the dishes. And he's like, well, you just said you wanted me to do the dishes. She then starts to go into, it's not about the dishes, it's about the lemons. Well, no, it's not about the lemons, it's about the ballet that you won't go to. It's about all this stuff, right? This is a big issue with communication. I actually have a whole masterclass on the art of feminine communication that dives into masculine and feminine communication much deeper. But this is a common issue with masculine and feminine communication that many couples get into, is the partner that is more embodied in the feminine will tend to be all over the place. I think men tend to see that as more emotional, so to speak, because it's, the way I like to describe it is the feminine will get to her destination, but she's got to take the scenic route. She's probably going to go all over the place in order to get there, whereas the masculine is going to go from point A to point B, is very directional. That's the difference between the masculine and the feminine. So in this argument, Brooke is in her feminine. People think of that as being more emotional. It's not that she's more emotional in this situation, it's that she's not going from point A to point B. She's not saying what she actually wants, so she's jumping to all these different things, whereas in the masculine's mind, he hears, I want you to do the dishes. He thinks that that's the issue. The issue is that she wants him to do the dishes. It's interesting how they're back and forth, they're arguing. When she has a discussion with her best friend on the phone about what happens, she admits to her best friend, I just want to feel appreciated. She never said that to Gary, which is a key thing. When she's talking to another feminine woman, she can get to what the root of this was. The root of all these things about doing this, about doing that, about doing this, this and that, and you're not doing this and you're not doing that. The root of that was she didn't feel like she was being appreciated for the work that she was doing. That's what she wanted from him. It wasn't about the lemons, it wasn't about the dishes, it wasn't about the ballet. Not saying those things were irrelevant to her, but it was about her not feeling appreciated for what she was contributing to the relationship. Because she's going all over the place, because she's avoiding saying the thing that actually is what she needs, because most of us do, to be honest with you. Most of us, we either don't really understand in the moment why we're getting so upset, or we're afraid to say the thing that we actually want in the relationship. Because she's getting upset, he's trying to match her anger and her closedness. She's closed off in that moment. She's closed off, she's angry. If you notice, her whole body language is she's angry, she's shut down. She's shut down to him. That's repelling him. And what's happening is he now is getting on the defensive. So he's now, in this moment, one point he says, I just need 20 minutes to myself to relax. But he says it angrily at her. Now, if he actually needed 20 minutes when he got home from work to zone out, that's something that the two of them can agree upon. In fact, if she wants more connection from him and he wants more silence, if he's like, I need 20 minutes of silence, and she's like, well, I need 20 minutes for us to connect and just talk to each other and like reconnect after the day, which is a very common need for the feminine, and the alone time is a very common need for the masculine. If the two of them agreed to like, okay, he gets 20 minutes of like zone out time and she gets 20 minutes of the two of them coming together to connect, that's 40 minutes of their evening that they have now just dedicated to their relationship and managed to give both of them what they actually wanted. It's a pretty good compromise, right? Wouldn't you say? And 20 minutes may not be satisfactory, and especially for the masculine, you're gonna need to hold to that 20 minutes. If you tell a woman that you need 20 minutes of zone out time when you get home from work, you better stick to that 20 minutes. Because if that 20 minutes turns into an hour, 2 hours of zoning out, whatever, you haven't kept your word. You said you needed 20 minutes. So that's an important aspect of the masculine that you gotta pay attention to. But again, he only tells her he needs that in the argument when they're already upset with each other. He has not expressed that as a need in a time when the two of them were in the right mindset to be discussing what their needs are. Also, she's upset, she's frustrated, and he then pulls out the N-word, nag. You're just nagging me. Now look, I actually have a video talking about the difference between nagging and feminine testing, where I dive into this more. Nagging in general is not a beneficial form of communication, because it usually shuts down the communication, because men don't respond well to nagging. I will admit that there are some men who jump to calling things nagging that aren't really nagging, and I get into that more in the other video, so I'm not gonna dive into that here. However, I would advise men, if you want to have good communication with your partner, maybe she's nagging you, maybe she isn't, I don't know. You accusing her of nagging you is not going to help the situation. It's not. It's good because you're now shut down because you feel like she's nagging you. You accuse her of nagging you, she's going to shut down. Like, as a man, when a woman criticizes you and you know how you shut down and you get defensive, when you accuse a woman of nagging, you're shutting her down, and now you're both shut down and you're not going to get anywhere. Communication's done. So as a man, if you just try to throw out the N-word like that, keep all the N-words out of your arguments. Just put it that way. In that argument, when he's like, you're nagging me, you always nag me. Oftentimes when people say, you always do this, usually that means that they're in a trigger and they're bringing up past resentments. So he's like saying all these things that she is criticizing him for. Here's where the problem comes, okay? We don't actually know, because we don't know their actual past relationship history, if she actually has been critical of him. It does seem in their relationship like she has had to mother him, so maybe she has. It's a valid point, but we haven't actually seen that, so we don't really know. So we don't know if she's actually been criticizing him or he's just been feeling criticized by however it is that she's communicating things. We don't really know what that scenario is. However, one of the issues is he's bringing this up when she's already upset about something that's hurt her. And this scenario is actually very common in relationships where one partner, typically this happens with the male, but it could go either way, where the male partner feels sort of nitpicked or criticized by his female partner. He doesn't say anything, he builds up resentment. So he's building up this resentment for the way that she is talking to him or treating him, but he doesn't say anything. He doesn't actually express to her, when you talk like this bothers me, when you talk like this, you know, this is not helpful to me or something. He waits until she gets upset with him over something that she probably legitimately should be upset with, and she expresses her frustration or hurt or something with him, sometimes in a healthy way, sometimes not, but either way she's expressing something that's bothering her about the way he's treating her. And that's the moment that he then decides to bring up all the things that he doesn't like that she's done to him. That's really bad timing, right? Because she's already upset and hurt by something that you've done. So now you use all of that stuff that you've been building up resentment for as a way of attacking her. That's not healthy communication. And then you end up having a lot of men who complain that they can't express how they're feeling or that something bothers them and they're not allowed to express that, when in reality, if you're only expressing it in a moment of trying to deflect when somebody is upset with you, that's not actually communicating your needs. If you're expressing it in the moment, or, you know, whatever moment is actually the next available opportunity you have after something happens where you may not want to confront someone who's doing something to you in a certain situation or something, but you take the next opportunity that you have to express, hey, when you say this to me, this bothers me, or when you say this to me, I don't find this helpful, or when you actually express to your partner, like in the moment or in, you know, a moment around when it's happening, that something is bothering you, or set a boundary or something. That's a healthier way to do it, because then when she decides she needs to express something to you, it can be about what she needs to express, and when you're expressing something to her, it can be about what you need to express. The problem that so many couples get into is that, like, one partner, or even sometimes both partners, will hold everything inside, and then one of them will lose it, and then the other one just like pulls out their, you know, big bag of complaints that they have, and the two of them just start comparing complaints. That's not going to work, because it just turns into a battle where everybody's shut down, everybody's angry, and everybody's frustrated, and nobody's complaints actually get dealt with, because it just becomes this like comparing contest of like whose complaints about the other person are better or worse or more important or less important or something like that. I'm not saying that Gary is a narcissist. Man children tend to exhibit a lot of narcissistic qualities. They're not all universally narcissists, but I will say that regardless of whether he is or isn't, this is a very common tactic of narcissists. So Brooke decides that she says she's done, she deserves better, she's ending this, it's over, and she's decided she wants them to break up. Here's the problem. She doesn't actually want them to break up. She tells that to him because she's hoping that that will be his wake-up call. If you do actually feel like you deserve better, and I do think that Brooke deserves better in this situation, but if you do really feel like you deserve better, and you walk away and you end it, it's really unhealthy to do that with the hope that they're going to change. The problem is that Brooke thinks that saying she deserves better and walking away will make him change. Nothing can make him change. He has to need and want to change himself. That was part of the problem, is that Brooke really didn't want to break up. She just wanted things to change, and she felt desperate. Now, she said all the right things as far as I deserve better. She did deserve better than what she was getting in this particular situation. I don't really think she believed that. I think she just said it and then walked away and was secretly hoping that he would change and come back. She was hanging on to that. Basically, they end up deciding, because they both own this condo, neither one of them is going to agree to move out, so they end up essentially having to live together while they're dealing with this breakup until they can actually figure out how to sell the place and things like that. They have similar friend groups, and you really do get the impression in this situation that Brooke and Gary were really just friends. Like, they did not have a lot of sexual polarity, which happens a lot when you have a woman who feels like she has to mother the man that she's with. You're gonna lose sexual polarity. But they did seem like they were friends. They had a lot of similar friend groups. They had a lot of similar things that they were interested in. Although he was more into sports, she was more into the arts, and she was constantly making compromises to do the things that he wanted to do, and he was never willing to do the things that she wanted to do. Very common thing in relationships. I've absolutely been guilty of this. Absolutely been guilty of this, where I will constantly be okay with doing the things that my partner wants to do, but then he will never be okay with doing the things that I want to do. Very common pattern in relationships for women. Women do tend to feel like they need to be more agreeable to maintain a relationship, whereas generally speaking, most men have not been conditioned to have to be agreeable in order to keep a relationship. There are obviously men who do this, and there are men who put their wants and needs on the shelf and to accommodate a woman, and I'm not saying that doesn't exist. However, it is more typical in our current society for women to put their wants and needs and desires on the back burner and compromise for the guy. Brooke says in their big argument that they never do anything together, which isn't true. They do things together, but she's throwing that out there because she's feeling like they never do anything that she wants. He starts pointing out the things that they do together, and she was like, oh, well, that was really fun for me. And he's like, well, he thought what she wanted to do was what he wanted to do, because she was she was doing those things, and she probably enjoyed being with him and spending time with him, but she also wanted to do things together that were things that she wanted to do, and she wanted him to show her that he loved her enough to do these things because he knew it meant something to her, whether he enjoyed them or not, because she was making the effort to enjoy things that weren't really typically in her, realm of things that she would do, because she loved him and she wanted that same thing back for her. But during this breakup, Brooke and Gary are kind of starting out trying to make it seem like the friendships aren't really changing, or some things are shifting, or Brooke's trying to kind of push Gary away, hoping that then he'll get the hint and he'll change. Neither one of them actually really wants the breakup. It's almost as if they're both going along with this to spite the other one, which is not a healthy place to be in. Brooke is holding out and trying to she ends up doing all kinds of manipulative tactics. She ends up going out with guys that she absolutely despises to try to make Gary jealous. All these kind of things that she's desperately trying to do to get his attention and get him to change. It's not working because he doesn't want to change, and he's getting more stubborn, and he's getting more trying to get even with her. It becomes a battle. The two of them are now in their masculine because they're competing against each other. I'm not going to break down every single thing that happens, but I will say one significant moment is that Brooke decides that she's going to walk through the apartment naked to kind of make him want her. And it's interesting how he's so focused on the video game, and then she comes walking through the living room naked, goes to the kitchen, just gets something to drink, and comes back, and he cannot take his eyes off of her. He has been so focused on these video games, and these video games were all he cared about, and Brooke just walking through, and he cannot keep his eyes off of her. The masculine's attention will always go to the most radiant thing in the room, which is why televisions that emit a lot of light tend to attract the male attention. She was so radiant and glowing, and walking through and just walking back, and in her sort of just effortless glory. She was nervous. She was trying to psych herself up for doing it, but she was just in her natural yep, I'm beautiful, I'm radiant, I don't care, and she walks through, and that got his attention. She didn't have to be needy, she didn't have to be, that's one of the things I would say, if you're looking for your partner's attention. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily do this if you two aren't at that stage of your relationship where you're in a sexual relationship, but if you're in a sexual partnership with a man, he's paying too much attention to the TV, just effortlessly walk by, glowing and radiant in whatever stage of dress or undress you want to. Go about your day, do your thing, I guarantee you, his eyes will leave the TV. Just saying. And if it doesn't, leave him. He's not worth it. So in this back and forth that's happening between the two of them, one of the significant scenes that was very subtle, but I think it was really significant, is Gary talking to his brothers, and particularly his older brother, and his older brother has been asking him for, it's like the logs for his trips on the bus and things like that for this bus company. And, you know, Gary's been kind of fluffing it off, and at one point Gary's like, oh, well, you just do them. And the older brother, who has been a very grounded, masculine, he's the business guy, he's the one that keeps things running, he's the one that keeps the structure of the company, he kind of loses it and gets really upset with Gary, and is basically saying, you know, like, I do this, I do that, I do everything for you. I want you to do this one thing for me so I know you appreciate the things that I've been doing. That's exactly what Brooke needed to say. So what this is, and it's funny how most of the breakdowns I've seen of this really attack Brooke. And I will admit, Brooke does not do a great job of communicating to Gary what her wants and needs are in the beginning of the movie. I'll get into how she ends up communicating with him in a way that works in a minute. But if you watch the whole movie, you can tell this is a pattern for Gary. He's like this with his older brother. He's like this with Brooke. He's like this with his friends, which I'll get to that in a minute. This is a pattern for Gary. Gary is living his life like he's the child. He's sort of the star of the show. Like, he's the star of his business because he's the face of the company. He's kind of the star, and everything has to revolve around him. It has to be his way. It's a very man-child like behavior. And the fact that now his brother calls him out on this, I don't think it fully clicks with Gary at that moment, but I think it starts to plant the seed that, okay, maybe there is something to Brooke being so upset with me. Maybe there is something to this, because Gary's older brother has a more masculine mind. He's expressing himself to him like, I just want appreciation, as opposed to Brooke, who's like, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, I want you to do this, when in reality what she wanted was appreciation. When Gary hears his brother say that, his brother is like, I need appreciation. I want you to do this for me so I feel appreciated. It's a more direct way of saying it. Now, it doesn't fully wake Gary up yet in that moment. So what happens is Brooke decides she wants to give things like one last kind of try. It's subtle, but she basically invites Gary to a concert that she knows he would really like to go to. Doesn't say it's like for a date, doesn't really express how important it is to her, but she kind of like, hey, if you want to go, okay, we'll go if you want to go. She gets all excited that they're gonna do this thing together, they're gonna connect. I think it seems like she has decided that, okay, well, maybe if I try to go back to the way things were and I do the thing that he wants to do, maybe I'll get him back. It doesn't work, he doesn't show up, she's heartbroken. Gary's not thinking that Brooke wants him back. So Gary doesn't think it's all that important. So he doesn't show up for her. He comes home and realizes that Brooke is crying. And oh my God, that moment where she is crying is so, like, I got emotional watching it. I really, really did. I'm getting emotional now, even thinking about it. She is so just laying it all out. She's fully expressing what she's always been feeling. Like, she's finally letting it out. She's letting the tears flow. You don't have to cry in order to be vulnerable or express yourself. Like, I'm not saying that you have to turn on the waterworks. Don't if it doesn't feel authentic. But the fact that she's literally releasing, she's letting that go, and she's sort of she's let her guard down. She's just like, I do all these things for you, and I just don't feel like you appreciate it. And it's interesting how Gary says, I wish that you had told me this. And she was like, well, I have told you this. And he's like, yeah, but not like this. And he tries to go to her. If you notice, in that moment, he is so magnetized to her. She is so vulnerable, she's so open, and she's pushing him away, but she's so open and vulnerable that it just draws him in. That vulnerability is a magnet to the masculine. And that's the moment he starts to wake up. And when she starts talking about like everything she's done for him, and she's laid out his clothes like a 4-year-old, like, you can tell, like, she has been mothering him for a very long time, and she is exhausted and she's tired and she feels unappreciated. If she had communicated from an open-hearted, vulnerable place in the beginning, they may not have had to get this far. They might have been able to work through things before they had this breakup. Unfortunately, what Brooke did was she waited until she was absolutely totally done with him and felt like she could not recover, like the relationship had no way of recovering, before she let that out. That's not a good thing to do, because it's better for you to openly communicate and be able to let your guard down and show vulnerability earlier on before things actually completely fall apart. However, there is something to the reason why women in general, I would say, tend to wait until the last minute before they do this. Because if you think about it, Being that open and that vulnerable is scary. Most people are terrified to be that open and vulnerable, even with themselves, like even just alone, to actually like admit these things to themselves, to cry, to release, even by themselves. But to another person, that can be terrifying, which is one of the reasons why I always say that vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a strength, because it's terrifying to do. So if you do it, you're a pretty strong person. However, if you're at the point, like if she was at the point in the beginning of the movie where she still wanted the relationship, like she did not want the breakup, even though she said she wanted the breakup, she didn't really want the breakup. If she had been like that vulnerable and he had said, I don't want to deal with this, and left, that would have been a lot more painful. Technically, it's safer for her, at least in her mind, because for most of us, we think of vulnerability as being unsafe. If in your mind you're like, well, I'm leaving this relationship anyway, I'm done, it's easier to be vulnerable because then you don't care. If he rejects you, if he leaves, if he just got really defensive, it's like, well, it doesn't matter, you're done with the relationship anyway. Which is why so many people, unfortunately, will wait until things are already done before they actually let their guard down and be vulnerable. There's a few caveats to this. As much as I love the difference between Brooke in the beginning and Brooke in her moment of vulnerability towards the end. Huge difference. It's such an example of like being like closed off, closed-hearted, defensive, attacking, bringing up things that aren't really the thing that you're upset about, and then just being like open and vulnerable and saying what you want. A masculine partner who truly loves you is going to be unbelievably magnetized to that. That open-hearted vulnerability, he's going to be so drawn to that. It's gonna be so powerful for him. There are certain types of men, for one, if he doesn't actually care about you, which my argument would be if he doesn't care about you, well, better to know, and then you can let him go, right? Some certain personality disorders, particularly like narcissistic personality disorder, sociopaths for sure, anything like that, they're not gonna be affected by that. They may even use that to their advantage. And I do think that that's one of the reasons why many women especially don't get that vulnerable, because many of us have been in situations where we've let ourselves get vulnerable and we've just gotten hurt. Which is one of the reasons why it's important that when you do let yourself get vulnerable, you need to remind yourself that you have your own back. And if you let yourself get vulnerable and the other person decides to use that against you or decides to be cruel, that's why it's so important for you to know that you have your own back and that you are willing to walk away if somebody does not treat your vulnerability the way you deserve to have it be treated. So like if Brooke had been this open and vulnerable at the beginning, like before they had their breakup, and he had rejected it, and her being willing to walk away, it would have been difficult because she didn't even want to walk away back then. It would have been difficult, but it would have been justified. It would have been absolutely justified for her to walk away, because if she's gonna be that open and vulnerable and he's gonna reject it, you don't want someone who can't be there for your vulnerability. But at this point, she now sees how he is with her vulnerability, but she's already done. Like she's like she says, she has nothing left to give. He doesn't have the opportunity to work on things in the relationship with her. This is where timing is an issue, right? And this is why I want to encourage more women to understand how to connect to their open-hearted vulnerability, while also knowing that like you have your own back. If you become vulnerable and the person you're with decides to use that against you and not want to hold you, not become that masculine container that wants to protect you, you now know that he's like that, and you know your own worth to know that you deserve someone who does treat you that way. Whereas if you never show him that vulnerability, you're gonna push it down, and you're probably gonna have it bubble up and explode into big arguments like what they had at the beginning of the movie. So Gary, at this point, after seeing Brooke like that, it's a big wake-up call for him. He actually has a discussion with one of his best friends. His best friend really calls him out. Like, Johnny does an amazing job, and this is the key. Most men need other men to hold them accountable. It's one of the big problems we have in our society today. There's so much focus on like women's accountability, women's accountability. Masculine men hold other men accountable. That's a brotherhood. That's a masculine leader. That's a masculine brotherhood, is men holding other men accountable for their actions. And Johnny calls him out. Johnny calls him out on the fact that, you know, yeah, everybody, even his friends, they have to do what Gary wants to do. It's all about Gary, and Johnny basically calls him out and is like, hey, Brooke didn't have a chance. She didn't have a chance because you were never gonna let her in enough, let her see the real you. Like, he totally calls him out. That's one of the biggest things that's missing from the world today, is men actually stepping up and either leading and guiding or being in a brotherhood or something, like men holding each other accountable and really calling each other out on their bad behavior and stuff. Like the world needs more of that. And this scene, I was so excited when I saw it. I was just like, yes. If you notice, that's the moment that Gary really gets it, right? So it's the combination of his older brother basically calling him out. It's Brooke being open and vulnerable and truly expressing herself in that vulnerability and letting him see and letting Gary see how much he has really truly hurt Brooke. And then having his best friend Johnny like call him out and be like, hey, yep, this is how you are and this is how you treat everybody. This is like, Gary needed this. Like this was what he needed. Now you notice when it was Brooke calling Gary out, he got defensive. Having other men call him out was more effective. You can call it misogyny if you want, but generally speaking, men tend to respond to other men calling them out. They tend to respond to open vulnerability from women. Doesn't mean that women can't call a man out. It's just the way that it happens. So Johnny calls out Gary in a very direct way, whereas when Brooke calls out Gary in the sense of like showing him how much he has hurt her, the combination of the two, that's what wakes him up. Unfortunately, he tries to make amends with Brooke and she's like, I have nothing left to give. And I won't go into like the whole specific ending of the story because that's not really as significant, but Gary needed that. He needed that wake-up call. And it's interesting how one of the big things that Gary and his brothers had always been talking about throughout the movie was that, you know, they were doing these bus tours and like they were gonna get a boat and they were gonna go and they were gonna start doing like guided boat tours and things like that, and like they were gonna step up their business. You end up seeing in the course of this that not only did Gary wake up and decide to try to make amends with Brooke, which he tried, and you know, it didn't go the way he wanted it to, but it also motivated him to, one, he started doing the things that his brother was asking him to do in the business. The business then grew. They ended up getting a boat so that they could actually do the boat tours. Like everything in his life started getting better because of having men in his life that were calling him out, and because Brooke was actually willing to be open and vulnerable with him and show him what his current actions were doing and how it was hurting her. And really, he realized how it was hurting himself and everybody around him. It's one of those things where, you know, they always talk about like women that have the glow up after a relationship ends and stuff. And I don't think Brooke really necessarily had like a glow up, so to speak, in that sense. I mean, she's Jennifer Aniston. She was gorgeous before, she's gorgeous after. I mean, that's, you know, she didn't really let herself go at any point in the movie, but this was like Gary's version of a glow up. There are some women that could look at that situation and be like, well, hey, why wasn't he that guy when we were together? But the thing is, he needed to be called out, and he needed to hit that moment. He needed that challenge. The masculine thrives in challenge, the feminine thrives in safety. Gary needed to be challenged. And living in his man-child world of having his girlfriend be his mommy to take care of him was not challenging him. He needed to lose everything or risk losing everything, which is why the best relationships, I feel like they always say like the best relationships are when the man loves the woman more. I don't love that mentality because I think both people should be loving each other in a relationship in order to have a healthy relationship. But men need the challenge of knowing that a woman will leave if he does not step up to his full potential, because he needs that motivation to step up to his full potential. For most women, being challenged like that and thinking that the man will leave at any moment is going to put her in a sense of being unsafe. And women thrive in safety. It's interesting how Brooke's moment of safety actually came from her boss in her career. So Brooke decided that she was going to leave her job and she was going to travel. She was going to kind of just go out into the world and like see the world and just kind of find herself. When Brooke approached her boss, Marilyn Dean, who in reality, I mean, when you meet Marilyn Dean throughout this whole thing, she seems like a complete arrogant narcissist. I mean, she seems like this completely self-absorbed, like kind of loony person. But when Brooke confronts her about she wants to do this, that she wants to go, she wants to travel, she wants to get away. Initially, Marilyn's like, okay, name your price. What do you want? I'll pay it. I don't care. I want to keep you. And Brooke is like, no, I don't want that. I need to go and find myself. And it's interesting how Marilyn's like, okay, just so you know, you have a job here when you get back, and please keep in touch. And like, it's a safety net, right? Brooke has not had that feeling of safety with Gary because she's been on edge with Gary because Gary's been in his man-child mode. And I'm not saying that women necessarily always have a career as a safety net. I'm not saying that they're always gonna have a boss who is so wonderful and understanding. In this particular situation, it was her boss, it was her job, that's where she got her support system. That's not universal, obviously. But generally speaking, the feminine is gonna thrive when she feels like she has that safety, when she feels like she has someone who has her back, regardless of where her life decides to take her. The masculine needs to know that there's a challenge there. He needs a challenge he can achieve. And if you notice that when Gary kind of like lost it all and everybody called him out and like woke him up, that's when he reached his full potential. That's when he started to let his dreams started to thrive. Whereas Brooke really started to thrive and actually start living her dreams and doing what she wanted to do when she knew she had that safety and that security from, you know, at least someone in her life that had her back. And unfortunately, that wasn't Gary at that point. There were so many powerful examples in this movie of the masculine feminine dynamics. It was so well done. I find it really ironic that most of the scenes that I've seen where people break this stuff down, sometimes they've been pointing out Gary's man-child behavior, but oftentimes it's been like everything that Brooke did wrong. And Brooke even admits in the movie she was not perfect, that she was not innocent in this whole situation. However, when you look at the overall scenario, yes, I wish Brooke had been more open and vulnerable early on. I wish that she had set clearer boundaries and not spent so much time doing things for Gary. But it really did take things going the way that they did in order for Gary to wake up. And I love that the movie really acknowledged that. It took masculine leaders, it took like masculine men to step into his life and call him out on what he was doing wrong in order for him to step up. So many great examples in this movie. I loved the arc because I really did feel like this was such a coming of age, a movie of like a man-child to adult kind of a situation. Yeah, I highly recommend this movie if you haven't seen it. For me, it was really tough to watch because so many, like some of the scenes I was just like word for word, I was like, oh my God, were these people like in my marriage? Like it was really, really freaky. I'm sure there are women that when you see this, like, and you see some of these scenes, like you're gonna feel it. You're gonna feel it. I know I did. I'm really glad that I decided to break down this movie and finally watch it because The Breakup was great for a breakdown. If you have not seen this movie, I highly recommend that you watch it after you watch this video, see if you can pick up on some of the things that I mentioned. I'm gonna try to post some like individual scene clips and do some mini breakdowns on my stories and on my TikTok so you guys can kind of see some of these scenes, how they play out. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you have any film requests, questions, comments, anything like that, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I love to hear from you and I love your suggestions. Thank you guys so much for watching and I hope you join me next time.